This is the sketchbook for my Celebrating Differences project, and it shows my work from the initial planning and experimentation stages, developing my skills in multiple fields, learning about the different aspects of the project, the design elements, the formal elements, and how to confidently take on a live brief. The first week of this project was centred on a live brief from Nikki Wall and in partnership with Dyslexia UK, and the theme was abilities and disabilities. I started by learning about the charity to get a better understanding of the type of work they do and in turn what they may be looking for. Then I looked into the theme and other artists that have explored it that I could take inspiration from, as well as artists that are known for collage, allowing me to explore my options. Then I moved into what the project meant to me personally, and this meant making my map, exploring my individuality and its importance. Then I found research images that related to me in terms of my hobbies, interests, strengths and aesthetic. This included both primary and secondary images, and then I looked deeper into why I was drawn to those. Next, I started to put my images into collages, and this meant experimenting with different placements and colour schemes until I found something that was meaningful and aesthetically pleasing to me. I ended up with 3 options, the 2 shown here being my experimental collages, and the third option shown here being the one I took further, as it was immediately the one I was drawn to. These were my development stages when I was arranging my photos to see which composition I liked best, and this meant gathering all the photos that fit into this colour scheme which I had sourced from magazines, books and the internet, and I ended up altering it slightly after these experiments to the composition shown here. I annotated my collage to show all the intentions behind the elements I chose to use, and this allowed me to explain it whilst keeping it personal. These elements were what really started to make my collage come together, and I did them to develop some new skills in alternative media. I did these in ink and watercolour powder, and I just experimented with what I could do using only the 2 materials on different paper, like with water or paint. I ended up using these experiments minimally, but I picked the best match to my colour scheme and it really tied together the whole composition. Next I did some digital collages again to develop my digital portfolio, completed in Photoshop and finished in GoodNotes. This is my final collage, which I presented to Nikki Wall, and I finished it off with some extra elements like oranges which I hand-dried to add sensory appeal to my work, as well as a chain to make it personal like my bracelet, and I was careful to focus on details before evaluating my choices. That moves this on to the second week, which was based around identity and culture, and it had a particular focus on the different uses of colour in art. Next, I looked at the colour wheel, and I both used an online one to identify the colour I wanted to take further, which in my case was orange, and the colour schemes it fits into. I then made my own colour wheel to develop my skills in colour mixing from only the primary colours white and black. Then I chose to look into the uses of the colour orange in the Chinese and Indian culture, as I found some secondary source photos to use as inspiration. I decided I wanted to look further into the Chinese culture, and so I completed this digital response based on orange in the Chinese culture, and this meant showing it in the commonly used analogous colour scheme that it falls into. I then made a mood board to allow me to look more at photos to take inspiration from with the theme of the colour orange. I looked at how it is used against contrasting and analogous colours, and this allowed me to get a range of inspirations. I noticed the common theme of lanterns throughout this research, so I decided to make a mood board and take it into 3D, producing the paper lanterns shown here. Then I looked at making my inspiration photos, and I chose that I was drawn to this blue one, and I made it into 3 traditional media culture responses, starting with a pencil response, then a watercolour version, and finally my favourite, an acrylic paint response, which allowed me to explore how different media can alter the way a reference is interpreted. The next week's theme was body image and well-being. in relation to visual language and symbolic imagery, and here I simply looked at how it can be used and what it is. Then I looked at the way visual language and symbolic imagery are used in music and music videos before moving into visual communication examples. I looked at visual metaphors in advertising, then colour psychology in film posters, before looking at expressive material used in art, which helped me gain a better understanding of these terms and their uses. Then I made 2 responses, each for colour psychology, expressive use of materials, and symbolic imagery, using all different materials to create a range of responses. I made a Zentangle next, centred on well-being and body positivity, but also using visual communication and typography. I looked at all personal aspects of well-being and body positivity and translated them into doodles, which I then filled the gaps with relevant patterns that provided depth and inferred tone. I explained my intentions here, and then I made notes on a documentary about photographer Rankin and artist and activist Alison Lapper. This brings me to week 4, which was starting to whittle down my ideas and develop them into a more refined project. I started by looking at the previous themes in depth and making a pros and cons list, which ended in me deciding to carry further body image and well-being. I looked at organisations and activists as inspiration, found some inspirational images and quotes that related to my chosen theme. I then started to produce calligrams and slogan art, which started with me choosing words to some songs and poetry and turning them into different media responses. These were the more design calligrams and slogan art, but all of my photos were personally sourced, including this top one being done in my iPhone screenshots. I then hand-wrote typography over the top in fonts that I thought were relevant, not including the bottom one, which was typed. I made the last one into a collage on imperfections, hence the incorrect spelling. I completed this 4-piece set on body image art that I'd intended to show the breakdown of the perfect social media imagery and societal standards. This meant using 4 materials, each gradually breaking down the perfection that is expected in the media when it comes to the human body. I am really pleased with the message of this set. This was my collaborative visual research, and it was a collage I produced following an aesthetically pleasing colour scheme, presenting common insecurities in a beautiful light, and this meant using texture and colour playfully. This was the inspiration for my 4-piece response series. And then week 5 was centred around producing an outcome, and this started with allowing my previous work to re-inspire me by looking at how I've subconsciously used the previously unknown design elements. I set my intentions for my outcome and got out all of my original ideas. I then translated my previous work into a set of 4 thumbnails each, which allowed me to experiment with alternative compositions and to keep the design elements in mind while producing new ideas. I did end up using all of the design elements successfully. Here are the thumbnails I created in relation to my final outcome idea, which was a wearable art piece inspired by the female body that allowed me to develop my skills in 3D by playing with textiles. This page is all of my notes that I took from start to finish, detailing the cost, the materials I would need to make it cost effective, my lino, which I made twice because the first time I forgot to do it backwards and I learned from that mistake, and my magazine cover mock-up. Next I showed my original attempt at using the sewing machine, as well as my templates for sizes of fabric that I needed cutting, and my linos, as well as some fabric samples underneath to show the cotton fabric I chose. Then, this is a booklet outlining the process I followed in making my final pieces, as well as my evaluation of the Celebrating Differences project from the beginning, and my 2 artist statements, both the longer and shortened 150-word version. Finally, this is a print of the final magazine, which was separately printed on photo paper and had the acrylic paint lino, and this was my final explanation. Also, here is a spare boob from the outcome, which has 37 on it in total, although I produced 40. And this is the final outcome, which I named Femme. I have enjoyed this project, and the work I've produced has been valuable for developing skills that I will undeniably take further.